They said the snow wouldn't fall that early in the season, but on the edge of Elk Hollow, where the wind howled like a hungry ghost and the trees creaked like old bones, the flakes came down thick and fast just as he found the boy. Carter Langston had lived alone in that pine-split cabin for 6 winters straight. Folks in town called him the Ghost Cowboy, not for his skin or silence, but for the way he kept to the edges, half here, half gone. His horse, Ember, was the only soul who heard him talk, and even then it was mostly weather or whiskey he muttered about. But that evening, as the sun died orange behind the hills and the storm rolled in early, Carter spotted something moving out by the old fence line. At first, he thought it was a coyote, then maybe a deer, limping, but it didn't move like either. When he saddled up and rode out, all he found was a boy barefoot, coatless, curled tight under the split rail post like a dog left out too long. Carter crouched beside him. The boy didn't cry, didn't shake, just looked up through tangled hair with eyes too tired for his years. "You lost?" Carter asked. "No answer." "You got a name?" The boy's lips parted, cracked and blue. But what he said wasn't a name. It was just one word. Safe. Carter didn't ask more. He wrapped the boy in his duster, hauled him up onto Ember's back, and rode slow through the falling dark, the boy's body small and weightless against his chest. Inside the cabin, he lit the fire, set beans to boil, and rubbed life back into the boy's feet with the same hands that used to cradle a newborn once. A long time ago. He didn't ask again about the name, didn't press. Some stories come when they're ready. The boy didn't talk the first night, or the next, but he never cried out in sleep either. Just curled near the hearth like he'd always lived there. Carter gave him one of his old flannel shirts, rolled the sleeves, and watched as the boy moved with quiet eyes that noticed everything. It was 3 days in when the twist came. Carter had been fixing the porch rail, hands wrapped in leather and sweat, when he heard a sound from inside. Not a crash, not a cry, just a voice clear and strange and certain. "I used to live in a red house," Mama sang when it rained. Carter froze, the hammer dropping beside him. He walked back inside, slow as church bells, and found the boy staring into the fire, as if the flame had whispered it out of him. "You remember her?" Carter asked, his voice tight. The boy nodded. "What happened to her?" There was a pause, a long one. Then the boy said, "She gave me the name, but I lost it when she stopped singing." Carter knelt beside him, feeling something loosen deep in his chest, something that had been tied up ever since his own boy vanished in the flood all those years ago. "You don't have to tell me more," he said softly. "You just stay here. We'll figure it out together." And the boy, for the first time, smiled. Not wide, not for long, but enough. As the snow kept falling outside, Carter poured 2 mugs of weak coffee and sat beside the boy in quiet. No questions, no noise, just the steady breathing of 2 souls who'd been lost, and maybe, just maybe, weren't anymore. Sometimes healing begins with silence, and sometimes it doesn't take a name to know you're finally safe. What do you think of that boy's story? Let me know in the comments, and stay tuned for more. It's just getting started. By morning, the snow lay thick like a quilt over the world, muting sound and softening the sharp edges of the land. Carter stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, boots crunching gently in the powder. Behind him, the boy was still asleep by the hearth, curled beneath a quilt, older than most men in town. Carter wasn't used to quiet, that wasn't lonely. For years, the silence had felt like a weight. Now it just felt ... full, like something was living in it again. He saddled Ember for a short ride into town just to trade for flour and salt. Before he left, he crouched beside the boy and left 2 things near the fire: a tin cup of milk, warm, and a small wood carving of a horse. No words, just gesture. By the time Carter returned, the milk was gone and the carving was nestled beside the boy's cheek, like a totem. That night, the boy spoke again. "I think my daddy's dead," he said, eyes fixed on the flicker of flame. Carter sat still. "What makes you say that?" The boy shrugged. "He never came back. Mama said he would bet." Then she stopped saying anything. The wind outside hissed against the shutters, but inside, the fire crackled soft like a lullaby. Carter hesitated. He wasn't the kind to pry, but something inside him, maybe the part that had once held his own son's tiny boots, leaned forward. "You remember his name?" "No. You remember yours?" The boy was quiet. Then, almost apologetic, he whispered, She used to call me Little Finch. Carter smiled at that. It was a name a mother would give. Gentle, watchful, light on the ground. Well, Carter said, leaning back in the rocker, Little Finch it is. The boy looked up. For the first time, his eyes weren't just tired, they were curious, as if being named made him real again. They spent the next few days in a rhythm Carter hadn't known he missed. Chopping wood, feeding Ember, teaching the boy to boil oats without burning them. Carter even found himself telling stories, real ones, about old cattle runs, a dog named Whiskey, a scar on his chin earned during a brawl in El Paso. The boy listened, like every word mattered. Then one night, as the firelight danced against the cabin walls, the boy said something that froze Carter's blood. I know you, he said softly. Carter glanced over. You do. You were in a picture. What picture? In Mama's trunk, before it got taken. Carter's throat dried. His mind pulled back through memory, like a hand through fog. Long ago, before the flood took his wife and son, there had been another woman years before marriage, before duty, someone he'd known for just one season, one wild season beneath canyon skies. She'd left with no goodbye. He never knew she'd had a child. Carter stared at the boy, really seeing him now. The shape of his chin, the curl of his ear, the way his jaw clenched when he was thinking. What else do you remember about the picture? He asked, voice barely holding together. The boy blinked slowly. It was you and Mama, by the river. She was laughing. Carter's chest felt tight, like the cabin walls were closing in. He stood slowly, walked to the fire, and stoked it for no reason but to buy time. Could it be? He didn't say it, didn't dare hope, but something had shifted. Something had returned. Not certainty, not yet, but possibility. And sometimes, that was all a man needed to keep breathing. The next morning came pale and gray, the kind that doesn't quite feel like day at all. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold clung to everything like regret. Carter chopped wood before the sun crested the ridge, muscles working through thoughts he didn't dare speak aloud. The boy Little Finch watched him from the porch steps, knees tucked under Carter's old wool coat. He hadn't said more about the photograph, but something had changed in his gaze. It was no longer the stare of a stray trying to disappear. It was focused now, searching. Over coffee, Carter finally broke the silence. Your mama ever say where she grew up? The boy shook his head. Did she ever talk about me? Another shake. Carter let out a slow breath and rubbed a calloused hand over his jaw. I knew someone, he said, eyes distant. Long time ago, might have been your mother. The boy watched him quietly, like a sparrow listening to thunder. Carter reached into the drawer by the hearth. After a moment, he pulled out an old, faded photograph. It was cracked, nearly worn through in the center, but the faces were still visible. Him, barely out of his 20s, standing by the river with a woman in a summer dress, hair wild in the wind. He handed it to the boy. Is this her? Little Finch studied it. His eyes filled, not with tears, but with something heavier. That's Mama. Carter closed his eyes for a beat, the weight of years pressing against his ribs. He had known, somewhere in his bones, but hearing it from the boy made it real in a way that twisted deep. She told me my daddy rode horses and didn't like shoes, the boy said with a small, cracked smile. Carter let out a soft chuckle. I still don't. The moment hung there, gentle and sharp all at once. Carter had thought the worst pain was losing a child, but now he wondered if the greater ache was realizing you never knew one had existed. Do you remember what happened? He asked. The boy nodded slowly. One night, men came. They wanted her trunk. Mama told me to run. I hid. Then I couldn't find her anymore. Carter's stomach turned. Where was this? Don't know. Just trees and a long road. I walked. He must have wandered for days, Carter realized. Through cold, through fear, with nothing but a memory of a song and a name that wasn't even his. Why'd you come this way? I don't know, the boy whispered. I just kept walking toward the sky. Carter looked out the window. The sky over Elk Hollow was wide and unkind but honest. Like the boy. You're safe now, Carter said, voice thick. I promise. The boy looked up, eyes wet but steady. I believe you. That night, Carter couldn't sleep. He stared at the rafters, mind unraveling the past. The woman in the picture, Clara, had been his first love, wild and impossible. They'd shared one summer, and then she was gone. Chasing a life, she said, didn't belong to men like him. But clearly, she hadn't gone alone. Now the boy, their boy, was here, sleeping a few feet away, his small breaths rising in rhythm with the firelight shadows. Carter got up, stepped into the cold night, and looked out over the snowy pines. He wasn't a man who prayed, hadn't in years, but tonight he closed his eyes and did something close. He didn't ask for answers, just strength, and a chance to do right by what was left. Inside, the boy stirred once, then settled. Tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, maybe even danger, but for now there was peace. And in that quiet peace, something long frozen in Carter's chest began to thaw. 2 days passed, and though the snow melted slow off the roof, something inside Carter had started moving quicker. He'd lived half dead for years, going through the motions like a ghost riding fence lines no one else cared about. But now, with little Finch in the cabin, the silence had a heartbeat. The days had shape. Still, truth never stays buried long. On frontier ground, it was early morning when Carter hitched Ember and rode out with the boy, wrapped tight in a blanket, sitting in front of him. He didn't say where they were going. He wasn't sure himself, but his gut told him it was time to look for answers. They stopped in Elk Hollow, the sleepy town tucked between two frozen ridgelines, where the sheriff drank more coffee than whiskey, and the general store doubled as a place for stories and suspicion. Old Martha from the mercantile squinted at the boy. "That him?" she whispered. Carter tilted his hat down. "That who?" She leaned closer. "The boy they'd been talking about, wandering out of the woods. Some folks say he's cursed, others say he's an angel. He's just a boy," Carter said firmly. "And he's mine." It was the first time he'd said it out loud. It came easier than he expected. Martha studied Carter's face, then nodded, like she'd been waiting for him to claim something again. Later, they stepped into the sheriff's office. Will Towler, a friend from Carter's old life, looked up from his desk with a squint. "Well, I'll be," he said. "That the boy?" Carter nodded. "I need you to check something for me. Missing persons robbery. Any word of a woman gone missing on the roads east." Will glanced at the boy. "His mama, maybe." Will leaned back in his chair. "You sure you want to dig this up?" Carter glanced at little Finch, who stood quiet near the door, holding a piece of licorice Martha had slipped him. "Sure," Carter said. Will sighed and began leafing through the wire reports. 2 weeks back, he said slowly, "we got word of a stage held up near Dead Man's Crossing. One woman passenger went missing after. They never found her." "Name?" Carter asked, heart crawling into his throat. Will shook his head. "Didn't have one. Just said she sang hymns real soft the whole ride. Witness said it felt like a lullaby." Carter swallowed hard. That night, back at the cabin, Carter stoked the fire high. Little Finch was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It had weight now. History. As Carter sat near the hearth, the boy crawled into his lap. Without asking, he fit there easy, like he'd always been meant to. "My mama told me something," the boy whispered. Carter looked down. "What was that?" "She said if I ever found the man by the river, I should stay close to him. Said he'd be scared, but kind." Carter's throat burned. He rested his hand over the boy's back, holding him steady. "Was she scared?" he asked, voice barely there. "No," the boy said, "not at the end. She said it was time to send me home." Outside, the wind picked up again. The mountains groaned with the weight of snow, and inside the cabin, Carter closed his eyes and whispered, "Then we'll make this home. I swear it." That night, he dug through the cedar trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out the last of his son's baby clothes. He found a shirt that nearly fit the boy. He even let him ride Ember around the clearing the next morning, slow and proud. He didn't know if Clara was alive, but he knew what she'd done wasn't out of fear, it was out of love. She had sent the boy to the only place she trusted him, and now, Carter Langston, once the ghost cowboy of Elk Hollow, had a second chance. Winter thinned slowly. The trees stayed bare, and the mornings still bit deep. But you could smell something new in the wind, like the earth remembering warmth. Carter had started clearing brush around the cabin again, not because it needed doing, but because he needed to move. Too much feeling can settle heavy in a still body. Little Finch, now nearly always barefoot inside the cabin, followed him everywhere, asking quiet questions about nails, sawdust, and saddles. He never asked for more about his mother, not yet. But sometimes, when he looked into the fire, Carter knew he was remembering. Then one night, the boy had a nightmare. Carter heard it from the loft, short, sharp cries, then the sound of feet kicking against floorboards. He came down quick, knelt beside the quilt bundle on the floor. "Hey," he whispered, placing a hand on the boy's back. "You're all right, you're safe." The boy clutched Carter's shirt like he might disappear again, and through choked sobs he said, "They took her. I saw it." Carter's blood turned cold. They grabbed her trunk. Mama tried to stop him. Then the fire started. He held the boy tighter, voice low and steady. "You don't have to say it all now." But the boy went on, like a flood let loose. "She told me to run. She told me to find the man who smelled like horses and ashwood." He pulled back just enough to look at Carter through tears. "That's you." Carter had no answer, just a broken nod and a tight jaw. That night, once the boy had fallen back asleep in his arms, Carter sat by the fire with his old rifle across his knees. He knew now that someone had hurt Clara, maybe left her dead, maybe worse, and they'd taken something she wanted to protect. The trunk, maybe it held more than old clothes, maybe something that mattered enough to kill 4. And now, whoever had gone after her might realize they didn't get everything. The boy was still out there, and Carter knew the wilderness wasn't the only thing that watched from the dark. The next morning, Carter rode to town again, left the boy with Martha, who made biscuits shaped like stars, and let him pet her old tomcat, Dot, in the sheriff's office. Carter laid it all out, told Will about the nightmare, the name Clara, the trunk, the fire. Will listened, slower this time. When Carter finished, Will tapped ash from his cigar and said, "You think they'll come looking?" Carter nodded. "If they know the boy's alive." Here Will leaned back in his chair. "Then I'll put out a quiet word. Nothing big, just eyes open. But Carter, if this is what it sounds like, whoever did this, they're not common road bandits. They were looking for something." "I don't care what they were looking for," Carter said, standing. "They touched a child. They touched mine." That night, Carter rode back with a box of nails, a new padlock, and 2 oil lanterns. He reinforced the windows, nailed a fresh board across the front door's lower half, and when the boy asked why, Carter just said, "Storm season's not done yet." The boy didn't press. He seemed to understand without knowing the details. Like most children who've seen too much, he could feel danger before it arrived. Still, there were soft moments too. That night, as they lay beside the fire, the boy whispered, "You still don't know my real name." "No," Carter replied gently, "but I know your spirit." The boy thought for a second, then said, "I think I'd like to keep Little Finch, if that's all right." Carter smiled. "It suits you. Means I belong somewhere now, right?" Carter's voice caught. He placed a hand on the boy's back and said, "You always did. We just had to find our way home." And just like that, the fear of the coming storm faded for a moment, because in that quiet cabin, lined with ashwood and memory, a man and a boy finally belonged to someone again. Carter didn't sleep easy after that. The boy had stopped crying in his sleep, but Carter's dreams had taken their place, sharp flashes of fire, the sound of boots running on wood, and Clara's face in the dark, eyes wide with warning. So when the stranger came riding up the trail 3 days later, Carter felt it in his bones before he saw him. The rider was dressed plain, but too clean for Elk Hollow. Black coat, dark mare, posture too stiff for a rancher, and too confident for a drifter. He didn't carry a rifle, but Carter noted the way. His coat dipped slightly on the left where a sidearm would sit. The man stopped just beyond the gate, not crossing it. He looked straight at Carter, who stood on the porch, arms folded, Little Finch just behind the door, watching through the cracks. "You Langston?" the man asked. "I might be," Carter replied, voice like gravel. The man nodded once. "Heard you found a boy." Carter's jaw tensed. "Lot of boys out here. This one's special. Belongs to a friend of mine." Carter said nothing. The man dismounted slowly, not taking his eyes off the cabin. "My friend's real upset about losing something. Said it was in a trunk. Said the kid might have seen where it went." "What kind of friend sends a man like you to ask questions?" Carter said. The stranger smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The kind who pays good money to keep things quiet." Carter stepped off the porch, hand near his belt. "You come here for quiet. You're on the wrong mountain." The stranger glanced toward the cabin. "He's here, ain't he?" "You know he is. I know he's safe. That's all that matters." The wind kicked up, and for a moment, the world felt still. Just pine trees and breath, and 2 men standing between past and present. The stranger tipped his hat. "Ain't my business, really, but someone's gonna come, sooner or later, and they won't knock." With that, he swung back into the saddle, turned the mare, and rode off like a shadow swallowed by dusk. Carter stood there long after he was gone. Inside, the boy sat by the hearth, small shoulders tense. "You heard?" Carter asked gently. Little Finch nodded. "He's one of 'em, ain't he? Looks that way." The boy turned to Carter, eyes wide, brave but trembling. "If they come, will you send me away?" Carter crouched beside him, rested a hand on his knee. "No, never. You're mine now." The boy blinked hard, then leaned into him, holding on like he believed it. That night, Carter oiled the hinges, loaded the rifle, and placed a second blanket on the boy's bed, just in case they had to run. But he also pulled something out from the drawer under the coat, an old leather journal. He hadn't touched it in years, hadn't had reason to. He opened to a blank page and began to write. "For Finch, if ever I ain't there to tell you what came before." He wrote slow, clumsy at first, then steadier, not just facts, but feelings. How he'd met Clara by the river, how he'd never stopped wondering where she went, how the boy's laughter sounded like something remembered more than learned. The next day, he gave the journal to the boy. "What is it?" the child asked. "A piece of who you are," Carter said, "and a promise." The boy didn't say anything, just held it close. That afternoon, they saddled Ember and rode into town together. People stared. Some smiled, some whispered. But Carter didn't care. He bought a pair of boots for the boy, steady, worn leather, already broken in. The boy slipped them on and looked at himself in the dusty store mirror. "I look like you," he said. Carter smiled softly. "You look like somebody worth staying for." And that night, back at the cabin, as a cold wind howled outside, little Finch curled up beside the fire with the journal on his lap and said, "You think Mama's watching?" Carter stared into the flame. "I don't think she ever stopped." The next snowfall came without warning, flick wind-driven flakes that clung to the pines like ghosts and hushed the entire hollow. Carter bolted the shutters early that evening, eyes scanning the tree line even as the fire crackled behind him. Little Finch sat on the rug, legs crossed, drawing in the journal with a bit of charcoal. Carter had told him he could fill any page he wanted with whatever felt heavy on his heart. The boy mostly drew birds, always flying. "You ever kill a man?" Finch asked suddenly, eyes still on the page. Carter didn't answer right away. He stood slowly, poured 2 cups of warm cider, and handed one to the boy. "Yes," he said quietly. "Once, long time ago. Never felt like winning." The boy nodded like he already knew. Outside, the wind howled like it was remembering things it wanted to forget. That night, Carter dreamed of fire again. But this time, Clara was closer. She was reaching for something, for someone. The boy, him, he couldn't tell. He woke before she said his name. Just before dawn, Ember neighed, loud from the stable. Carter was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He motioned for the boy to stay down, then stepped out into the snow with his boots sinking deep. He didn't have to look long. There were fresh tracks by the edge of the clearing, not just one set, heavy, deliberate, circling the property. They'd come close, then doubled back. Carter followed them halfway to the ridge before they vanished into the trees. Whoever they were testing the perimeter, watching, waiting. When he returned, little Finch was at the window, pale but steady. "They're coming, aren't they?" Carter nodded once. "Soon." "What do they want?" "Something your mama had. Something they think you might remember. But I don't, I know." "Then why won't they leave us alone?" Carter crouched beside him, his voice low. "Because some men would rather bury the truth than live with it." That day, they didn't leave the cabin. Carter checked every window twice. He reinforced the doors, made sure the stove was burning clean, stocked food and water inside in case they had to stay shut in. But by evening, Carter did something else, something he hadn't done in years. He took out Clara's old music box. He'd found it years ago, buried in the cedar chest, with a cracked lid and a missing note in the melody. He wound it slowly, let it play near the hearth. The tune was sweet, broken in one spot. But Finch turned toward it with wide eyes. "That was her song," he whispered. Carter nodded. "She used to hum it when she was nervous." The boy leaned in close. "It makes my chest feel warm, like I'm not scared for a minute." Carter smiled. "That's what songs from home do." Then, softly, the boy began to hum. The same tune, same pace, filling in the broken note like he remembered it without trying. Carter listened, heart full and aching. "She said I had to carry her song," the boy said, "in case she couldn't." Carter reached out and pulled him close. "You're doing just that." That night, they slept beside the fire. No nightmares, just warmth. But Carter knew peace like that couldn't hold long. The wind was shifting again, and in it, he could feel the past galloping hard through the trees. It came not at night, but in the hour between light and dark, the time when shadows stretch long, and everything feels just a little unsure. The snow had stopped falling, but the clouds hung low like a warning. Carter was mending a hinge on the barn door when he heard the sound. Hooves, 3 horses, slow, deliberate, and unhurried. Not travelers, not neighbors. He didn't rush, he didn't panic. He just straightened, wiped his hands on his coat, and walked to the porch, where little Finch stood already, staring up the trail like he knew this day would come. 3 men rode in. One of them was the stranger from before, the one with the cold smile and stiff coat. But the others were different, bigger, meaner in the eyes. One had a scar that ran from ear to collarbone like a lightning strike. The other chewed a matchstick and spat it into the snow as they stopped. The stranger spoke first, Mornin' Langston. Carter didn't respond, just let his eyes settle on the rifle leaning against the porch rail, not touching it. Not yet. We come for the boy, the stranger said simply. Not for a fight. He ain't yours, Carter said. He ain't yours either. Carter stepped forward. He is now. The scarred man chuckled. Ain't how the law works. Lucky for me, Carter said calmly. The law's about 6 miles that way, and likely asleep. There was a long pause. The wind rustled through the trees. The boy stayed behind Carter, small fingers curled tight into his coat. The man with the matchstick spat again. That trunk we was after boy knows where it went. He don't, Carter said. And even if he did, you'd think I'd let him say, you'd die for him? The stranger asked, almost curious. Carter met his eyes without blinking. No, I'd live for him. But I'll shoot through any one of you if you try to take him. That changed the air. The stranger's smile faded. He glanced at his men. The one with the scar shifted in the saddle. Then came a voice, from behind Carter. You want the truth, little Finch said. Stepping forward, it burned. The trunk, all of it. The men looked at him like he'd spit on their boots. The stranger narrowed his eyes. That true, boy? Finch nodded. I saw it catch. Flames climbed high. Mama cried, but she let it burn. Said it was better that way. The stranger cursed under his breath. Nothing left, the boy added, voice trembling but strong. Not even her dress. The men sat quiet for a moment, and Carter could see it the way greed shifted into bitterness. You tell your friend, Carter said slowly, that if he wants to dig up ashes, he's welcome to freeze his fingers trying. But this boy stays with me. The scarred man leaned forward. We come back. You won't be ready. Carter picked up the rifle. I'm always ready. They turned and rode off without another word, hooves crunching sharp in the snow. No shots fired. Not today. Inside, Carter sat the boy down by the fire and poured them both a cup of cider. You lied, Carter said, not angry, just stating it. Finch nodded. I remembered where the trunk was. Carter looked him over. Why didn't you tell them? Because Mama said some things ain't meant to be found again. Carter watched the boy quietly. Then, after a pause, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. It was a brooch, tarnished but whole, shaped like a finch. I found this years ago, he said softly. Didn't know it meant anything until now. The boy took it in his hands, eyes filling. She wore this every Sunday. Carter nodded. She left it for me to find, or maybe for you. Finch clutched the brooch to his chest. We're gonna be okay. Carter nodded and pulled the boy into his arms. We already are. Spring came slow to Elk Hollow. The snow gave way to muddy trails and cold rain, and the pines wept their winter coats in silence. But something softer stirred beneath it, all buds on branches, the slow return of birdsong, and a warmth in the soil that hadn't been there in months. Inside the cabin, life had changed in 100 quiet ways. Little Finch had taken to chores, like he'd always lived there, hauling water, sweeping the porch, brushing down ember until the old mare grunted in approval. He even laughed now, not often, but when he did, it cracked something open in Carter's chest. Every time they built a new coop together for a few chickens Marta had offered from her spring hatch. Carter taught him how to shape wood joints, how to set a trap without hurting the animal, and how to know when someone was lying by watching the eyes. I watch yours too, the boy said one morning as they patched a fence. Carter paused and, what do they say? They used to be sad. Now, they're just tired." The boy grinned, but less sad. Carter chuckled. "That's progress, I guess." Still, the threat lingered, like storm clouds on the edge of a blue sky. Carter hadn't seen the strangers again, but he kept the rifle by the door, and he checked the tracks around the property every morning. Then, one day, a letter arrived. Sheriff Will brought it back folded inside his coat and stained with mud. "Came through a rider from the south," Will said, his voice low. "No name on the sender, but I reckon it's meant for you." Carter opened it slow. The handwriting was neat, unfamiliar, but every word was heavy. "You have the boy. That means she trusted you. He's safer with you than with me. I've done things I can't undo. Tell him I loved him, even when I couldn't stay. Tell him the trunk wasn't treasure, it was truth. If they find me, don't come looking. This is the only way I know to keep him free. C. Carter read it twice, then folded it and tucked it inside the journal without a word. Later, as dusk settled, little Finch noticed Carter staring out the window longer than usual. "What's wrong?" Carter shook his head. "Nothing new, just thinking." The boy sat beside him, pulling his knees up about Mama. "Yeah." Finch was quiet a long time, then asked, "You think she's gone?" Carter answered truthfully, "I don't know. But I think she made a choice, one that cost her something. She said she was going to send me home," the boy whispered. "And she did," Carter said gently. "Even if it meant she couldn't come with you." The boy looked down at the brooch in his hand. "Is it okay to miss her and still be happy?" Carter swallowed hard. "It's the only way to do it." That night, Carter added another page to the journal. He wrote about the letter, but didn't show it to the boy. Not yet. Some truths could wait until the ground was more solid underfoot. Instead, he read aloud from the beginning his own story, Finch's story, and how two broken lives crossed in the snow and found something worth holding on to. The boy listened, with his head on Carter's shoulder, eyes fluttering shut near the end. Outside, the air was warmer. A soft wind rustled the grass just beginning to grow. Carter looked down at the child, now wrapped in sleep, and thought, maybe this is what redemption feels like, not loud, not sudden, but steady, like a heartbeat returning. Summer arrived like a slow breath, one that carried no rush, just warmth, birdsong, and long shadows stretching across green hills. Elk Hollow came alive with bees and barefoot children, with church bells on Sundays, and the smell of soap drying on lines. The worst of the past hadn't vanished, but it had loosened its grip. Carter and Finch had found rhythm. Morning chores, midday rides, quiet dinners beside the fire. Sometimes they spoke of Clara, sometimes not, but her presence lived in the small things, the way Finch hummed her tune, the way Carter paused when he passed the river's edge, where once upon a time a woman in a summer dress had smiled at him like she knew he'd always be hers. Then one afternoon, a rider approached. Not fast, not threatening, just steady. It was Martha from town. She brought a satchel and a small leather-bound book. "They found her," she said softly. Carter didn't speak, just nodded once, and reached for the envelope tucked inside the book. It was a journal Clara's found buried beneath floorboards in a burned-out shack 3 towns east. Whoever had come for her hadn't gotten it. Carter opened to the first page. Her handwriting was the same as the letter. To the man by the river. "You once said I was a storm with a heart, and maybe you were right. But I want you to know I never stopped thinking of you, or the boy. His name was never the one I gave him. Not really. I called him Finch because he reminded me of the birds who always came back. His real name is yours because he came from that one wild summer we both thought wouldn't matter." Carter closed the book, chest tight. That night, he lit a fire out back, not for warmth but for ceremony. He and Finch sat side by side in the grass, the journal between them, the stars coming out above. "There's something I need to tell you," Carter said gently, "about your name." Finch turned to him, curious. "Calm your mama. She gave you mine." The boy blinked, then smiled, small and sure. "So we match now." "We always did," Carter said. Cliff said. Finch looked up at the stars. "Do you think she's still watching?" Carter nodded. "Every time the wind moves through the trees." They sat there until the fire burned low. The next morning, Carter carved something new into the cabin beam. Just the name, not his, not hers. Finch Langston, a name born from fire and snow, from silence and song, from one broken man and a brave little boy who reminded him how to live again. That fall, Carter finally tore down the extra boards on the windows. not because danger had vanished, but because he no longer lived waiting for it. He'd chosen love, chosen to stay, chosen to become the father he never knew he'd been. And little Finch, he grew strong, grew tall, grew loud when he laughed, and tender when he prayed. He never forgot Clara, but he belonged now, wholly and without question. One life lost, another saved. 2 stories braided together into one that mattered, and that was more than enough. Some stories don't end with gunfire or gold, but with the quiet triumph of 2 people deciding to stay. What part of Finch and Carter's story stayed with you most? I'd love to read your thoughts below. And if this journey meant something to you, follow along. We've got more stories by the fire.